Join us for a special edition of Alabama Unfiltered, where we interview 3 candidates running for state office, 2 for state auditor, 1 for Secretary of State. And believe it or not, they're a fascinating interview because they're fascinating people. You don't want to miss it. Welcome into this special edition of Alabama Unfiltered. I am Amy Beth Shaver along with Allison Sinclair. Scott is off today because he has hosting duties for something this evening. But we are joined in studio by our Secretary of State candidate and 2 candidates for Auditor's Office. But before that, I want to let you know that you can go and sign up for 1819 News. You can subscribe. It can come to your inbox every morning. You can find out exactly what's going on in Alabama. You can also sign up if you'd like for the daily detail. And then make sure if you go on all the social media sites like YouTube, 1819 News, Gab, Getter, wherever else we are. I mean, who knows? It's spreading like wildfire. Give us a 5-star review, a thumbs up, share it, like it, tell your friends about it. But we're excited to get started with Andrew Sorrell, who is a candidate for auditor. How are you?
I'm doing well. Great to be in here with you.
We're going to get to what in the world is the state auditor. But first, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got here, why in the world state auditor?
Sure. So we ended up in Alabama because my dad's a preacher. So my dad, granddad, and great-granddad are all 3 preachers, and I'm a politician, so I totally messed that up. But nonetheless, we got called to a church in Muscle Shoals, Alabama when I was 6 years old. We moved here in 1991, and so I've spent the last 30 years of my life here. Graduated Muscle Shoals High School in 2004, graduated University of North Alabama in 2006. So if you do the math, that's 2 years. I did set a record at UNA as the fastest person to ever graduate, earned my 4-year business management degree in less than 2 years. And actually, okay.
Did you take high school classes, like high school, college?
When I was in high
prep?
school, I did take some college classes, so I had a little bit of a head start. And then I took overloads. I mean, it was one semester, I took 7 core classes. And I went summers, and I got done in less than 2 years.
Was that purposeful? I guess it has to be.
I was intentionally trying to get done quickly because I started my first business, and I wanted to get to that.
Which was?
Wow.
Internet college textbook sales. I started when I was 16 in my parents' screen porch. My brother and I started that company. Grew to be quite large. We did $9 million in revenue one year. We had almost 40 employees at one point, and I just sold that company about a year ago.
You're a hustler.
I'm a serial entrepreneur.
Yes.
So were you selling things when you were like really young?
Always.
Yeah,
I took my Halloween candy to school and used to sell it off.
You know, of course you did. Of course you did. Okay.
Genius.
So you're running for auditor.
Yes.
What in the world does an auditor do?
Well, I had to ask myself that question in 2019 because, I serve in the legislature and there were 2 bills introduced to eliminate the state auditor. And actually, I remember going and sitting down with the current state auditor, Jim Ziegler, and saying, what exactly is it this position does? Because look, we've all been guilty of voting for state auditor and not fully understanding the position, right?
Guilty.
Right. So what Jim told me was the state auditor tracks all the state's property. So not the real estate. We're talking the personal property items, the pickup trucks, the iPads, the shotguns. And there's about $1.2 billion worth of taxpayer property. It's spread out over 176 different state boards and agencies. And we lose about 1% of it every year. There's a report actually on the state auditor's website you can go look at. By the way, none of the missing property item cases are ever prosecuted in Alabama. That's another big problem we have. We need to work with the attorney general and the local district attorneys to make sure that some of those get prosecuted. Even cases where we know what's missing and who took it, they're just not being prosecuted.
Why not?
I do not know the answer to that question.
So if you look, did a little research, there's Shad White, I guess, is the auditor in Mississippi. And so I was looking on his Facebook page. They are prosecuting things all the time out of his office, like welfare fraud or just embezzlement from different agencies and things. They obviously have some sort of jurisdiction to prosecute and arrest that. And you don't even work with the attorney general's office, or the auditor wouldn't?
So in Mississippi, they have sworn investigators and they have arrest power in their auditor's office. Okay. And I know this because I've spoken with Shad White because I want the Alabama auditor's office to emulate what the Mississippi state auditor's office does. They have about 150 employees. We have 8 or 9. It's less than 10.
So you've just shrunk over the years. That, not you, but that office.
That's correct.
That'd be awkward if you had shrunk.
I'm getting slightly larger as years go by. The auditor's office is shrinking. 1939, the Democrat-controlled state legislature passed a bill that stripped the auditor in Alabama of the financial audit capabilities, and they gave it to the newly formed Department of Examiners of Public Accounts. Now, if you were to put the examiners back under the state auditor where it should be, and as my bill that I introduced in the legislature in 2021 did, the bill was killed by a committee chair, unfortunately, but then we would have a serious state auditor's office again. So you've got to ask yourself the question, are all of the public officials and public employees in Alabama good, honest, upstanding folks who never embezzle from the government? Or are we just not catching them?
Oh, that was a rhetorical question. I was going to answer. I'll refrain.
Because as you noted, they're catching them in Mississippi every single week. I follow Shad White on Facebook. They catch somebody every week stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Why do you think the Democrats, what was the motivator behind the 1939?
I've heard a story. I can't speak to its authenticity, but I'll share the story because it's a good one. So apparently Big Jim Folsom used to say, I'll lie to you, I'll cheat you, I'll steal from you, but I'll tell you I'm doing it. Well, everybody thought it was funny, so they voted for Big Jim. Well, the state auditor didn't think it was too funny. The Big Jim was saying he's going to steal and lie and cheat. So he said, maybe we ought to investigate Big Jim. Well, Big Jim didn't want to be investigated and got the legislature to strip the auditor of the ability to investigate. So again, don't know for sure that that's a true story.
No,
but
it sounds about right.
It sounds true. It is Alabama.
It sounds just par.
And here we are 80 years later, and we've never corrected the problem.
So we have an opportunity.
Well, we do. We really do. And it's going to take people reaching out to the legislature and saying, we want a serious state auditor's office. The state auditor's office, I say we have a weak state auditor in Alabama, and I don't mean the person in the position. I mean the position itself. Yes, the auditor does still track the property. Yes, the auditor appoints board of registrars members, which I'm sure we're going to get to at some point in this interview. But no, the auditor does not do any of the financial audits anymore. They're all done by the examiners. They routinely run behind on their audits. My local university told me they have to hire independent auditors to come in and do their financial audits so they can renew their bonds. And the head of the Department of Examiners of Public Accounts makes more money than the state auditor and the governor combined.
Okay, which is how much money?
It's over $200,000 a year.
Sure.
Don't know the exact number.
Okay.
It's all just ringing true.
Good grief. So you bring up this idea that they're examiners, and our listeners are saying, okay, that sounds familiar, but what does an examiner even do?
Yeah, so the examiners do what the auditors should be doing. They actually go in and do the financial audits in Alabama. Now, all they're doing is making sure that money is not being skimmed off the top or whatever. But what they're not doing is looking to see, is there a better way to spend this money? Is there any way to save money here or there? And that's another really valuable function that our state auditor should be doing. Who better than the state auditor to look for ways to save taxpayers' money? By the way, fits my personality perfect. I was one of the most tough fiscal conservatives in the state legislature the last 4 years, voted against spending bills routinely, voted against bills that grew the size and scope of government, introduced legislation to save taxpayer money. All of it was just killed because in Montgomery right now, there's not much of an appetite for actually shrinking government.
So is that what made you choose to leave the legislature and move over and run for this office?
What made me reach that decision this year, and by the way, it was a very tough decision. I'm a first-term legislator. A lot of people expected me to serve 3-4 terms in the House. But so changing offices rather than running for re-election was definitely a big decision my wife and I prayed about for a long time. But the reason I finally did it was because I'm literally trying to save our state auditor. Our state auditor's position is under attack. There was a bill introduced this year and that passed the state Senate with only one no vote. By the way, it was a Democrat that voted no, to eliminate the state auditor's office. The bill came down to the House. It hit the House floor the last day of session. And I had to work the membership. I had to give them all my elevator speech on why the state auditor was worth saving. And thankfully, a lot of my colleagues stuck with me and we were able to defeat the bill. I think they were 17 votes short of being able to pass the bill. If that bill were to ever pass the legislature, it would go on the ballot as a constitutional amendment to eliminate the auditor's office. And I would encourage everyone in the audience, vote no. Do not get rid of your government accountability position. I think it's a huge mistake.
Well, and that's this is a constitutional office.
Correct.
Across the country. And there's a reason why I feel like it was instituted as a constitutional office, to be a balance between the agencies and the departments and the legislature. And it's like you've lost all objectivity now that it's in this big bureaucracy of a department. It just feels icky. So it feels weird.
This department is accountable to the legislature right now. I think there's a board of 6 state senators and 6 state representatives that this agency reports to. That's not the way it should be.
Right.
You want your auditor to be independent. You don't want an auditor.
It's very inbred.
Absolutely. You don't want your auditor appointed by the governor, for instance. Then your auditor is accountable to the governor.
Right.
That's not what you want. You don't want your attorney general appointed by the governor. You want those positions to be elected and accountable only to the voters. That's how you know you're getting truly independent audits.
Right.
So as we know, Alabama fourth graders visit Montgomery. Like that's the year where we study Alabama history. We visit, and your office is probably generally not visited by the kids. How can you make it interesting for a fourth grader so that they begin to care about the state auditor's office? It's obviously important.
I think kids love to listen to stories. And I think if we can go back and tell them stories about what the auditor's office used to be, explain to them that the state auditor is still, and to this day, 5th in line for the governor in Alabama, ahead of the Secretary of State, because that's how much importance the framers of the 1901 Alabama Constitution put on it. And then also give tours. Jim Ziegler used to do this. He would go out, greet the fourth graders, give them a little tour, show them some of the paintings in the hallways, tell them stories, and just get them interested in government. I mean, you're literally, the auditor's office is just down the hall from the governor. It's not a very large building.
Isn't that sad? And that most of us, myself included, had to look up what the auditor does.
Sure.
I mean, that's considered a down ballot race. And it is like you're in the Capitol. I mean, it's just crazy. So that's part of why I appreciate you coming on, because we're trying to educate all of us that slept through civics, I guess, in 7th and 8th grade.
It's true.
Guilty. But before we go, what just your top priorities? You said you want to bring the examiner department back underneath the auditor. How would that work? Would that just literally just shift? And what else are your top goals?
So first of all, it's going to be a big transition. That's not going to be something we can do overnight. Right. I think and ultimately it's up to the legislature. So I've already crafted a bill to do it. I've got to work the membership of the legislature and get them to try to move the office back. I think that's something that you'd want to take effect in like probably a 2 to 3 year timeline to provide for the transition. The auditor's office right now doesn't have enough office space even to really pull that off. The auditor is split between the Capitol, and then a lot of the employees are in another building. So I think that's going to be my number one priority when the legislature is in session, is talking with my friends in the legislature, trying to get them to be willing to give the state auditor a chance to strengthen the office. But also, I want to make sure that I've got the basics covered too. I want to make sure that we're getting our property audits done on time before I start asking for additional duties to be brought on.
Yeah, that's good. It's going to be interesting. I wonder if you win that transition across the street. It's a kind of a whole different role. But I think your time in the legislature probably will serve you well. Hopefully you get a good sponsor for the bill.
Yes, that's key.
Last question from me is, Jim, when his budget got downsized, he literally split his business cards in half.
Yes.
And so you get like a little 1-by-1 business card. Will
right.
yours look the same? Or will you have real business cards?
Well, I'll probably just pay for my own business cards. And by the way, I'm going to turn down the state vehicle too. I don't need a state car to do my job. I mean, I want to make sure that I've run on a platform of small government, and I want to keep it that way. And on that note, the state auditor's office budget has been slashed over the last few years. There's years when it's been down 30% that they've cut out of it. This year, I think they added $100,000 back to the budget. So whoever the next state auditor is going to have I think it's like a $950,000 budget instead of $850 from the year before. And really, $850, the office can't survive on $850. No. They'd have to start letting even more employees go. Oh, wow. So I think $950, I don't know if that's the right number or not. I won't know till I get in there and begin managing the auditor's office. But I'll tell you this, I'm not going to request a penny more from the budget than we actually need to run the office. But I don't want anybody to accuse me or Stan, if he were to win, of saying, hey, look, they said they're small government and they're trying to grow government. Well, no, the budget's been slashed so much already. Right. If you ask for some of it back, you're not growing government. You're just returning. I mean, if the auditor is not able to fulfill his responsibilities due to lack of budget, you've just handicapped the office and you haven't done the taxpayers a favor.
Well, I mean, in the end, you're saving money if you do it, and you have some business experience all the way down to selling Halloween candy. Pretty savvy. But, you save money by not losing all the things. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that really you forget. The iPads and the laptops and the phones and I think you said some guns, which I kind of forget about that whole side. And just tired. I don't know.
Well,
tractors.
That's an important thing to note too. Is even I think the auditor's office could be almost self-sustaining. It could pay for itself with the amount of property that you save. Because if nobody was coming behind making sure the property wasn't disappearing, how much more would be being stolen?
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point there.
Yeah.
So are there any last minute things that you want voters to know when they head into the booth?
I think so. I think, everyone running for office claims to be a conservative, but I have a voting record to prove it. I've been ranked the most conservative legislator the last 3 years in a row. My first year, I was ranked number 5. So I've never been below.
Did that offend you?
I remember going to a meeting at Lauderdale County Republican Executive Committee. I announced that I was number 5, and that they jokingly told me, "Come back when you're number 1." So I did go back the next year when I was number 1 and tell them that. But I think simply going to Montgomery and being a conservative is no longer enough. Simply going to Montgomery and voting the right way is no longer enough. What we need are conservative fighters. That's how I got constitutional carry moving in the state house. If you just sit there and vote yes or no on other people's bills all day, that's inadequate in my opinion.
Yeah.
We need people who are going to go down there and not be afraid to stir the pot, because Montgomery needs to be stirred.
Big time stirred.
Andrew, thank you for coming in today.
Appreciate the interview. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay, so I thought that was extremely interesting and very convicting.
It's really sad, and I regret it. So when I was getting my engineering degree, I didn't have to take any history, government. I didn't have to take a foreign language either. And when I sit and I try and learn and listen about these things, I feel so ridiculously uneducated, because that's something we should know.
Right.
And when you're only like four boxes down on the ballot, you should be pretty important. But I remember I would either just choose the coolest name.
Oh, who doesn't?
Oh, I like if it rhymed, maybe there's some alliteration there, or
unusual names.
Or if it made me giggle. And that's embarrassing.
Well, I think we've all been guilty of the same thing, or like texting our friend while we're sitting there voting and saying, "Do you know any of these people?"
Yeah. And now I think what I tell people is, okay, if you don't know about a candidate or a race, just leave it blank. Like,
it's okay to do that.
Let the people that are educated on a certain candidate or race do the choosing.
Right.
But really, sometimes you have to think that when we get ourselves in these positions with our elected officials, it's really our fault, because we don't put the time in. We see the billboard, we see the Facebook ad, and we're like, they look okay. All right, that sounds good. But we don't really dig deeper. And I think that's the point of this podcast, is to give people enough information. We don't want to overload you, but enough to where you go, oh, I should be paying attention to that. And you go do your own research. So I'm excited to have Jim Ziegler in. He's about to walk in the studio. You never know what's going to happen. So we'll see what his plans are for Secretary of State.
Sounds good.
Okay, so welcome to Jim Ziegler, our current state auditor, who is running for Secretary of State. And I anticipate this is going to be a super exciting, entertaining little interview, because it always is. It's always fun. Before we get started, I need to say that we did ask Wes Allen to come on, and he is just jam-packed for the next week, and we just couldn't work out a time. But he was invited to come on the podcast as well. But we're super excited to have you with us today.
Does that mean I get twice as much time since I'll be...
Hey, it's your show. It usually is. So we're just going with it.
Yeah, we're just rolling.
All right.
So talk to us. Okay, you've been around politics for a while, but give us a little bit of background about, I don't know where you grew up. I don't know a little bit of your history, and then how you got started, why in the world you ran for auditor, and now you're running for Secretary of State, kind of. And you obviously were also in the governor's race to begin with. So take us through kind of your evolution of how we've ended up here.
Well, I am from Sylacauga, Alabama, the home of Gomer, Jim Neighbors,
Yes.
Gomer Pyle, who died 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I grew up and went to high school there. My father was for 20 years the mayor of Oak Grove, which is a suburb. It's kind of like Mountain Brook is to Birmingham,
Yeah.
because Oak Grove is to Sylacauga, and that's sort of funny. But he was very much a civic leader, And so I guess I inherited this honestly. And if I can be half as good a Secretary of State as my father, Blois Ziegler, it rhymes with voice.
What a
That is a great name.
Yeah,
I would have
people-
voted for that name.
See,
Blois.
we would have circled that in just because
Yeah,
it was a cool
absolutely.
name.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful mayor and was twice chairman of East Alabama Regional Planning Commission, which is the 11 counties, basically from Gadsden to Auburn. And so I came by it honestly. But I graduated from University of Alabama, Roll Tide,
Roll Tide.
and I earned a degree that's very appropriate for a future Secretary of State, public administration.
Okay.
That's exactly what the Secretary of State does, and a degree, a Juris Doctorate with coursework in constitutional law and elections law. Now, how about that?
Well done. You were ahead of the
Okay.
curve.
So on the educational basis, I will put that forward as a very solid basis for a Secretary of State. The past 7 years and 4 months, and what time is it? In about 7 hours, I have been the state auditor. And I am term limited, so I could not run for a third term
Right.
as state auditor. I've been interested in elections and in problems in the election and what we, the public, and the leaders can do to safeguard election accuracy and integrity. It started in the 2000 presidential race between Al Gore and George Bush.
The hanging Chads.
Yes.
Wow. Oh, those Chads.
The mess in the state of Florida. And it was so bad and such borderline a constitutional crisis for this country that the National Republican Party decided to recruit a team of election lawyers to go each presidential election prior to the election and do preventive medicine to try to spot what problems might go wrong and prevent them. And so I was selected, and I went in 2004, 2008, and 2012. In 4, I went to the Panhandle, and in 8 and 12, I went to Tampa. And it was like I was getting a master's degree in election problems and how to prevent election problems, and we did. So by the 2016 election, we felt like Florida had really evolved in terms of its election accuracy and the problems. They hadn't completely gone away. You've got to be constantly vigilant. But by 16, Donald Trump carried Florida. Obama had carried it the 2 previous times. But I'm not a newcomer to fighting against election problems and irregularities. I would put that experience and educational background up against anybody in terms of being the chief elections officer of the state of Alabama, which is what the Secretary of State does. So this is quite a natural for me. I feel like I'm where I need to be.
That's a
So-
good feeling.
What did you learn when you were getting a master's level education down in Florida that you could apply to the position if you were elected Secretary of State?
Well, some things would not help or would not be applicable, like don't let Yankees from New York run the polls. You know, we don't have as much.
But you don't have the snowbirds.
I mean, yeah.
You don't have that.
They have that problem in Florida. We don't have that as much in the state of Alabama. But this was the overriding thing that I learned. An election problem is far better addressed beforehand, before the election, rather than try to cure it up after the election. And sometimes you're in a situation where a problem occurs anyway,
Right.
and you have to have a recount or a challenge or a litigation, that's not the preferred way to handle potential problems
Right.
in an election. Anticipate what might go wrong or identify the soft spots and prevent it. But an ounce of prevention is worth a whole ton of cure when it comes to election problems. I'll take that approach as the Secretary of State and try to identify what could go wrong and try to prevent it from going wrong.
When I was in college, I read Stephen Covey's, just for fun, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's
That's a
when I
good
was
book.
back really responsible and together. Things have changed, but that's what I remember. It's like try and be proactive instead of reactive. So if you were elected as Secretary of State, what would your top priorities be for the election system? How could we weed out some of the potential issues? Because no system is perfect, but you put in all the safeguards that you can, and then you have to have power to prosecute the things that do go wrong. So what are your top priorities for the election system?
I don't know if I could enumerate them as first, second, third.
Okay, in no particular order.
I have identified a problem that's captain obvious. This, everybody would agree, is a problem, and that is lack of voter turnout. In the May primaries, we had 23% of the registered voters to turn out. Now, that means when you go somewhere and you see 4 people, 3 of them did not vote at all. Think about that.
Why do you think that is? Oh, this is a deep one.
It is. Negative ads,
I agree.
people thinking that their one vote doesn't count. I so disagree with that. We've got the example right in Lee County, Alabama, where the state senator, Tom Watley, lost by 1 vote. 1 vote. And so if anybody thinks their 1 vote doesn't matter, and across the state, we had a number of elections with 14 votes here.
Right.
And a couple of hundred votes here. 1 vote does matter. And if you've got thousands of people that think their 1 vote doesn't matter, then obviously it does. So I am developing a program to increase voter interest and participation. I've got a model to go by. The current Secretary of State ran a successful program on voter registration.
Right.
Right now, Alabama has the highest voter registration that we've ever had, and one of the highest in the United States. So the program that was done worked. Voter registration is not the problem now. It's voter turnout or lack thereof on Election Day. And I'm beginning to put it together. I'm going to put together a citizens group, and it will be a multi-part program. We will involve the churches, media personalities, athletes, celebrities,
That's good.
and all of them can give a testimonial for why they go vote, why it's important for you to go vote. And this is doable. It's shown on the voter registration. When they first started this thing to get people to register to vote, I heard people say, well, people will either register or they won't.
Right.
Didn't turn out to be true. If with the proper program, and it did have multiple facets, you can be successful. Let me just give you one fun example. Involve the weathermen, the meteorologist. Can you?
Okay.
All right. Say start about 5 days before Election Day, and all the meteorologists. Hopefully, they'll get to competing to who can do the best job for this. And today's forecast, tomorrow. And on Tuesday, Election Day, we are expecting clear skies in the morning and scattered thunderstorms in the afternoon. So you may want to make your plans on Election Day to vote early to avoid those thunder showers and the traffic that we always have when we have thunder showers. So every time that Tuesday is mentioned in the weather forecast, the long-range forecast, talk about it being Election Day and you need
Get
to
a
make
little
your
reminder.
plans.
Yeah, okay.
And now what did that cost the taxpayers?
Zero.
Zero. What did it cost the media outlet? Nothing.
Nothing.
Few seconds, just a little focus on it by the meteorologist, and it actually improves their forecast because it focuses people on the idea that they need to pay attention to the weather because they got to go vote that day. So it's a win-win situation. Now, there are some people right now saying, "Oh, that's silly. That won't make it." I'm going to ignore those folks while I'm getting it done.
Just block out the haters. Block out the haters, Jim. So I thought you were going to say that we were going to have like a contest between the meteorologists where like if we get 40% voter turnout, somebody was going to shave their head or something. That would be super
you
fun.
could also do that.
You
heard it here first.
You're thinking that James Spann's got a coverage there. Channel 6 has a coverage there. Channel 13 has a coverage. And see who...
I like
Could create
thinking
a
outside the
buzz.
box. You know, and it's interesting you mentioned churches because there's this whole thought, I feel like, within kind of the church community that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. And it's a tragic thought in my book because God calls us to preach the gospel and to intervene and to be salt and light to all corners of the earth. That even includes Montgomery, which is hard to say sometimes. But
It's true.
But I do think that that's important is just thinking outside the typical box, because what I find is when you're trying to motivate people, we really, those of us that are in touch with politics and kind of that's our bent, we preach to the choir a lot. It's an echo chamber with who we reach. So I think that's a great idea. That's interesting. So what else in terms of like machines? Are you on board for getting rid of the machines? You want to go back? Like I miss the old school lever. Like
Those were the best
where
machines.
They close the curtains and all the like. I'd like to go back to those.
Why not?
I have announced that I'm forming a working group, a citizen working group. We might allow a few politicians on it, but not too many. It'll mostly be a normal citizens working group. And I've had 3 or 4 people to volunteer for it already. And a couple people I've asked would they serve, and they said yes. And what this will do, we're going to do a comprehensive study, what you might call a management audit of Alabama's election system. And we may or may not bring in some experts to come in and look at it, or we might see just how far we get with our citizens looking at it and come up with the soft spots, the ways it can be improved, one of which is the voting machines. Now, in Alabama, it's kind of peculiar because we have paper ballots, but the paper ballots are then scanned by an high-tech digital scanner, and those results go in ultimately into computers specialized for this purpose. And so it's not really the electronic voting machines of the past. You sit down and you do the little squares, the little ovals, and you mark your paper ballot. And those are kept, so if there has to be an audit or a recount or there's a challenge of some sort, we've got the paper ballot. That's a good thing when it's needed. So what we'll be looking at was this scanner and the interface with the computers and the ability of a hacker to hack into the scanner or the computer. And we're told now that it would be impossible. There is no modem, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no chip, this, that, and the other. And what I'd like to do is bring in a bunch of youths, a bunch of teenagers, a bunch of teenage hackers, and see if they can hack into this thing. Some of these hackers could hack into Fort Knox, and I want to take an Alabama voting machine and see if they can hack it.
That
what
sounds
do you
exciting.
think?
We'll live stream it for you.
Absolutely.
We'll do
I'm
the
listening to a
commentary.
Wall Street Journal podcast on the hacker right now that, you know what? It's a great idea. So as our interview is coming to a close, what are some last minute takeaways that you want the voters to know about why they should get out and why they should vote for you next week?
As the state auditor, I served as a watchman against waste, mismanagement, and corruption. Sadly, we had some of all of that in Montgomery, and we were able to win some battles, didn't win them all. As the Secretary of State, I can serve as a watchman against election manipulation, against drop-off ballots, against all mail-in ballots, against non-citizens voting, against hacking into the system, against any method of voting manipulation. So a vote for Jim Ziegler is a vote to put a watchman over our elections.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Is that legal? I don't know what time it is, but okay. Did you see 2,000 Mules?
Oh, I certainly did. I went out and saw it in the theater with a large group of conservative constitutionalists, and it was a very concerning. And I would recommend any of the viewers go online. It's now free, 2000mules.com, MULES, 2000mules.com, and watch it.
Yeah.
If you're not worried when you finish watching that movie, watch it again.
That's a good word.
Oh, my goodness.
That is a good word.
Well, thank you so much for coming in with us today, for sharing your vision and educating us about the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
It's one of those offices that, to be honest, I don't want to call it a loser office. That's not nice at all. But nobody paid attention to it, really. I mean, Secretary of State, you're like, maybe they do some business things. 2020, everything got really, really important. So we appreciate you running and your commitment to truth and just investigating, just seeing what we find. I mean, I don't understand why we can't open some of these machines and why we can't. Hopefully there's nothing there. But the one machine that they have opened, there was a chip in it. And they didn't think it was there either. So I appreciate your transparency and your willingness to kind of put to rest some of the people's concerns or find something and then let's deal with it.
That's right.
So
That's right.
good luck on June 21st.
Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
It's good.
Okay, so that was a great conversation with Jim Ziegler, who's our current state auditor, who's running for Secretary of State. And I
He's
thought
a
he said something
hoot.
real. He's absolutely hilarious.
I think he's always been that way. And some people think he's kind of quirky but like it's very endearing in that he's just a person.
He is.
He's not your typical politician.
Which I appreciate in this day and age.
Yes.
And
Refreshing.
I think the money quote for me from him was that voter registration was increased, but voter turnout was not. I mean, we had 23% turnout.
Yeah.
But I thought that was very interesting.
I'm not sure what it means, except that maybe, John Merrill likes to talk about that he's registered all these people, which is great because I do encourage participation. We have to get people more involved in their civic duties. Sorry, every time I say duty, I want to giggle. So it just blanked my head. There you go. I said duty. Anyway, so we do need to increase participation, but what does that mean if they're really not getting out and voting? What good is that?
That's right.
And I was surprised because I feel like after all we went through from 2020 until now, we would have had, 23% for a primary is average.
Right.
They're talking about in this runoff election that there might be 10 or 11%. And in Alabama, the Republican primary and these runoff, in a lot of ways, it is the election.
It is.
As we're a Republican state. And it just baffles me that more people aren't interested. Maybe Jim can make it fun again. I don't know.
I think it would be also fun because when I ran for office 100 years ago, it was a day.
That was 8 years ago.
It was 8 years ago, but it felt like 100. But maybe making it into just a festivus, the festivus for the rest of us kind of a day, but just kind of a different atmosphere. I think we also have to retrain our brain that, yes, we know we vote in November. Everybody knows that from civics. But we also have to understand that you're right. In Alabama, the primary is the day.
Yeah,
and so what can we do as people who are involved with politics to make sure people understand the importance of that day, that most people are going to be out of town. So to absentee ballot, make sure you have that. Make sure you've registered. There's little things that we can do to tweak that to make sure that more than 23% turn out. And then for the runoff, that more than 10 to 12% show up, because those are the people who are deciding who sits in these offices for the next 4 years. So there you go.
I think it's the whole impetus for why we're doing this show, which, talking about state auditor and secretary of state may not sound all that glamorous or that fun, but it's really important. And I hope that you all will take this and watch it, share it with your friends and family before next Tuesday on the 21st. But we have Stan Cooke, who I've actually never met. I hear he's a great guy. So I'm excited to meet him. He'll be in the studio in just a minute. So we have Stan Cooke in the office, in our studio, not our office. That would be way too serious for us.
It would be.
I don't know why I said office.
But it feels like an office, so we're saying it.
Yeah, well, try and be official. And Stan is running for state auditor. I've never met Stan, so I'm excited to get to hear a little bit about your background, kind of why you decided to run, where you came from.
Certainly.
Anything we need to know about you.
Well, born and raised in Walker County, born in Jasper, raised in a little small coal mining town called Summiton. Mm-hmm. Used to be called Summit, but because they wanted to apply for a post office, they adopted the name Ton on it for the tons of coal that they mined.
Okay.
So that's how you get Summiton. So I grew up there. We grew up pretty poor community. You were a coal miner or a farmer, and that was it. So we grew up poor, had to earn $1, and I know what it meant to take your bicycle and put a milk carton basket on it and drive up and down the streets and get the Coke bottles.
Good days.
Get a nickel per bottle. And later on, when I was a teenager, I would, instead of doing what most kids got to do was, play football, basketball, baseball, be at practice after school, I would go home and do my homework and then go to work for Drum and Coal at the coal mines, at the strip pit, flat top mine, and Sayre pit. I'd work about 5 hours a day. That's all they'd let me work. After school.
Wow.
Get my homework done, then go to work and come back and do it all again, 5 days a week, and earn my money to go to college and buy me a better car.
Yeah.
So I know what hard work means, and I know what it means to look at that payday and see the taxes taken out.
That's not fun.
And the appreciation of all the adults that raised me and everybody that struggled the same struggle. Later on in life, that would play into my desire to be in politics to make life better.
Where did you go to college?
First college I went to was Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Have a bachelor's degree there. Then I have a bachelor's from UAB. And then a master's from UAB and a master's degree from the Institute of Jewish Christian Studies in Texas.
Okay.
And then a PhD from UAB and a PhD from Alabama.
That's why you said first.
Okay.
Okay. I thought maybe you transferred, but no, you just kept getting degrees.
Yes.
What are all your degrees in?
Oh, they're various. Physics, English, major minors, and then theology, biblical studies, and that's in the master's programs. And then education, leadership, and technology, and then a PhD in administration, higher education administration.
So how do you see those degrees that are, we need to call you doctor, how would those help you as you are elected to this office?
Well, that educational experience allowed me to learn how to communicate on a professional level, but also know how to treat people from various walks of life, from various backgrounds, taking my own into consideration, and then how to cast a vision, how to lead people to that vision, let everybody find their purpose. Everybody, I don't like to micromanage, so I like to give people a job and turn it over to them and train them and let them do their job. So the personal relationship, that's been going on for 35 years of being an administrator, either with the church or our World Missions program that we have in Israel, or working for major companies. I have been the warehouse manager, inventory control, property manager for Fisher Scientific, Immediate Business Systems, and Medical Laboratory Associates, which has an affiliation with Cunningham Pathology. And that's an old company here in Birmingham that used to exist.
So what is your vision for the office?
Well, number one, return it back to its constitutional role, that it accomplishes exactly what the Constitution says. Stay within the lane of its description. Don't meander out of the lane of the auditor, but do the auditor's job.
Which is what, according to the Constitution?
Okay. Number one job is to inventory and take a property management role over all state purchased property with state tax dollars, $500 or more. That's the number one role. Now, I will run that office differently than it's being run now. I don't believe in being Montgomery top heavy. I believe in hiring people to work in the field. So someone in Huntsville, someone in Birmingham, one person in Montgomery, one in Mobile, and let them serve 16 counties and put them in a centralized location where the majority of the property is located, so they're not driving all over the state.
Right.
There's no reason to have all these employees in Montgomery, and that's been a heated discussion. We let them work from home and then come into the office once a month and bring the reports, and we can have a meeting. So that's the number one goal, is to streamline the auditor's office with the budget that we currently have. I know other people before me say we have to have a larger budget, and realistically you do, but I think you have to prove yourself too.
Right.
And so we're going to do that. The second thing is the Board of Registrars is very important. They're on the front line of the voting process, election integrity. So we want to make certain that everyone has a Board of Registrar, in my opinion, a constitutional conservative Republican.
And you have one vote.
One vote
Okay.
in every county but Jefferson County.
Jefferson County always has to be weird.
Yeah, and there's a reason why. It's not that it's just weird. Back when the Democrats ruled the roost and they were in control, they set up a piece of legislation where they opted out of the registrar system. And they, as a Democrat, the county leadership hired their own registrar and set up an office, a big bureaucracy here in the county. If I'm state auditor, I'm going back to my Republican brothers and sisters and say, hey, look, we didn't create this problem. We don't want to own it. Let's fix this problem. And I think if I explain it to them, what happened and the history behind it, I think we can get a lot of people to buy in and we can fix that problem.
So what was the motivator for Jefferson County to do that? Just to have control?
Democrats wanted control.
Yeah.
Just total control. And a lot of the problems with the auditor's office can be traced back to a Democrat governor, Democrat General Assembly before we had a Senate and a House, or a Democrat-led Senate and a House. They would vote to strip away the power of the auditor's office. It became the whipping boy of state government. And that's why we have a bureaucracy today in Montgomery, the examiner's office.
Right. And
they get a budget of $16 million a year from 2 budget allocations. And the state auditor's office gets $870,000 a year.
16 million?
16 million a year. 8.6 million just from the general fund.
Oh, wow. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. I know they employ like 150 people.
Yes.
And you have 8 in the auditor's office. So they really
Correct.
just stripped the office of the power that it should possess. That's
Right.
part of your goals. Why auditor though? And how did you get involved? Are you a practicing, do you preach?
Yes, I pastor a church.
Okay.
I'm a district bishop. I oversee 10 churches. We have a world missions organization in Israel,
Okay.
a school in Bethlehem that we support, an intake center in Jerusalem, a couple of clinics around the country. And then we have a small business in Jerusalem that's called Owning History. And what we do is help Christian Arabs and Jewish people get their Israeli-based market products to the market.
Okay.
And that's very rewarding because they struggle.
Well, how do you go from that to wanting, you said you wanted to get involved in politics, which is a bizarre statement in the
Yes.
first place, but then also to choose the auditor's office? Maybe it's because you appreciate how the value of a dollar and how hard you have to work for that.
Well, in the early 80s, I had the privilege to work for President Reagan on his first campaign.
Ooh.
And Ronald Reagan, the man and the message were one and the same. For the first time in my life, I saw a politician that told the truth, and his vision for the country was his personal vision. And he talked about taxes. Now, you think we're going through a tough time with Joe Biden. Well, we went through a horrible time with Jimmy Carter. I can remember coming to UAB, driving on the interstate, and there hardly being any cars on the interstate because nobody had a job and nobody could afford gas, and gas was rationed every other person, every other day. It was tough.
Yeah.
And I remember the battle that Reagan fought, and it was a budget battle. And everything goes back to taxes. And the taxes that the state has is not their money. It's your money, it's my money. And they tax that money away from us. So we need responsible leadership and servant leadership in government to shepherd over those taxes. And I pay the same tax that you do, but I want to make sure that they're spending it wisely and hold them accountable for the way they spend it.
So, we've talked a little bit today with other guests, but you mentioned something really important a little while ago, and that was about...
I did?
You did. And that was that, for some reason, people do not think that Christians should be involved in politics. How would you speak to those people and encourage them not only to make sure that they're registered to vote, but they do vote, but that they also stay involved in the political process?
Government by itself is neither good or bad, but it takes on the nature of the people that we elect. So if you want good government, you're going to have to vote for good people. So Christians should be involved in every aspect of politics. I believe we'd have a better nation if they were. We'd have a better state, a better county, a better city council. I think when you come from a Christian point of view on how you address issues, law and order, taxes, that you will be more sensitive to the needs of people and the needs of others. And I think that we can run the state better. So you can't, on one hand, complain about state government, and on the other hand, tell Christian people to stay at home and stay at church and not be involved. You're going to have to be involved.
Exactly.
Okay, so Alabama fourth graders visit. Okay, I remember visiting Montgomery. I don't know if you remember. Did you go to Walker High School?
I went to Dora High School.
Dora High School. Okay. So I don't know what grade y'all went to Montgomery, but we went in the fourth grade. And, they visit, and your office is right there where everybody can, they can come give you a little visit. So why would you, or how could you make a fourth grader want to stop by your office and find out what you do?
Well, if we know that the fourth graders are coming, what we'll do is we'll greet them in the doorway, and we'll stand out there in the lobby. And as they come through the metal detector in the front door, we'll greet them and we'll invite them in, and we'll make them feel welcome, and we'll make them feel like that capital belongs to them, and escort them around. And that would be a treasure to be able to do that. I might add that I did do those tours, and my first experience was to meet George Wallace as governor.
Oh, wow.
And I did not realize at the time when I was meeting the governor that the secretary that I passed by would be my future mother-in-law. And she was the recording secretary for the governors. So she served like 6 governors in a row.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she had been there. She was a fixture at the state capitol for a long time.
Wow.
And my father-in-law was a bodyguard. And but going in to see Governor Wallace at the time, and none of that's on your mind when you're a kid, But it's funny how that all came together.
That's pretty cool. That's funny.
That is really funny. That's amazing.
Well, is there anything else we need to know about Stan Cooke or what your plans are for Alabama, for your plans for this office?
Well, I'm going to bring 20 years of warehousing, inventory control, property management experience to the job. I'm not going to have to learn how to do this job. I've already done this job just for corporations. And I bring that background to state government. I think I can bring a Christian view and also a business view, not a capital Montgomery swamp view of government. Realizing that there's going to be bumpy roads and everybody's not going to agree with me. So patience and virtue will work in that aspect of the job. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to serving the people because I think the people need that window of accountability to remain open so they can look in on state government and see how their money's being spent.
Well, and build that trust back because we really don't feel like Montgomery or DC does a great job taking care of, and what you said is so important. And it's a paradigm shift for a lot of people of having, Montgomery needs to view it that that's not their money. It's the people's money. And even from our side, we are so accustomed to just, we're just paying our taxes. We're just paying our taxes. And never thinking about how the government is spending it. And it is so important because it's our kids that suffer. And especially right now, it's so apparent as gas tops $5 plus a gallon. Yes. How much those just tax breaks, small things. I think I read a statistic that this was in Mississippi, but each conviction of certain crimes and fraud, their auditor's office works a little differently because they do have jurisdiction to prosecute. Cost the taxpayers like $900,000, $1.2 million to prosecute and go through. And I'm like, if you can prevent the theft on the front end, then and it's amazing how all these little pieces go together. If you can just do it right the first time, then everything kind of falls into place. So your inventory management would come in very helpful.
And I believe there's some other ways to save the taxpayer money. And just to give you one quick different view of running government, we want to buy everything in Montgomery. We want to own it. We want to put a label on it and say, this is ours. But when you own it, you have to fix it when it's broke. And you have to pay another state employee to come in to service it, repair it, or maintain it. If we go to a leasing program on every piece of property that can be leased, like copying machines and computers and cell phones, and we lease those, then there's a relationship between the vendor and the department, not between government agency and government agency. And now there's a different level of accountability between that vendor that is supplying the printer or the copying machine to that agency. And things will not go missing, or they will not be missing for long without a red flag being waved.
Oh, that's interesting.
Very much so. Thank you for coming in today.
It's so nice
It's
to
an
meet
honor.
you.
It's good to meet you. It really is.
I'm really glad to have you.
Well, we want to thank you for tuning in for this special edition of Alabama Unfiltered. I am Amy Beth Shaver, along with Allison Sinclair.
I'm not Scott Beeson. I hate
She's
it.
not
I
Scott.
can't believe Scott couldn't be here. He missed it. He's probably really nervous, wondering
He probably
how this
is
going to go down.
But you know what? It happened, and we're grateful.
We did it.
We are thankful for you, for watching, for listening. We hope that you will go to all of the social media channels. When our show drops, make sure that you like it, you share it, give us a 5-star review. And you know what? We'll see you next time.
Thanks.